The letter arrived on a Thursday, which Cecily would later consider significant, Thursdays being, in her experience, the day most likely to rearrange a person's life without warning. There were 2 letters, in fact, delivered together to her father's counting house in Manchester, where Cecily had gone that morning with a query about a shipping manifest and stayed because the weather turned. The first was from the Duke of Merrow's solicitor, addressed to her father, and concerned the marriage settlement, the financial instrument that terms the proposed date. Her father had read it at his desk without comment, then passed it to his own man of business, who had read it with the careful expression of a man checking the arithmetic on a sum he already knew was correct. The second letter was addressed to Cecily. She had not expected a second letter. She opened it at the window, where the light came in grey and useful over the Manchester rooftops. 2 pages in a hand that was precise and unhurried, the hand of a man who never crossed anything out. The first page was brief, a formal expression of intent, the proposed wedding date, a line about the estate and what she might expect on arrival. The enclosure was different. It was a single sheet of cream paper. At the top, no salutation. At the bottom, no signature. In between, 12 items numbered cleanly, with a margin so exact it might have been ruled. Things a Duchess of Merrow does not do. She read it once, then she read it again. Behind her, her father had dismissed his man of business, and was now, she knew without looking, watching her. "Well," she said. He said nothing. "He has written me a list." "So I see." "Item 4, Cecily said, is that a Duchess of Merrow does not express opinions on matters of commerce or finance in company." She looked up. "He does know what you do for a living." "He does," her father said. "Item 7 is that she does not engage in familiar discourse with members of the household staff." She paused. "I have held 30-minute conversations with the Briggs boy about the merits of different rope suppliers." "You have," her father said. "And item 12. She looked at it. The item was worded carefully. Does not wear colours considered too informal for her position, including bright yellows and other shades unsuited to formal occasions. Which was either very precise or very oblique, and she hadn't decided which. He has opinions about colour. Her father set down his pen. He was a large man who had built his fortune through intelligence and the willingness to outlast everyone else in the room, and he had the quality, rare in men of business, of knowing when to speak plainly and when to say nothing. He looked at his daughter with the expression she had learned meant he was choosing. "Cecily?" "I'm not angry," she said, which was true. She was something else, something more useful than anger. "I'm reading." She finished the list. She stood at the counting house window and looked out at the Manchester street below, grey and purposeful, and completely indifferent to the question of what a Duchess of Merrow ought to do. And she thought about the man who had written this. She had agreed to this marriage with her eyes open. The Duke of Merrow had been introduced to her at the Haverfield Assembly in August, a rare northern venture for a man of his standing, and had spoken to her for 20 minutes with complete attention and no condescension, which placed him above roughly half the titled men she had ever met. He was not warm, he was not easy, but he had looked at her as though she was worth looking at, and when her father had come to her a week later with the offer, she had asked only 2 questions. "Is there debt?" And "Is there another woman?" "No debt, no other woman." She had said yes. She looked down at the list. She folded it in half, then in quarters, and placed it in the small inside pocket of her travelling case, where she kept the things she needed to find quickly. Not because she was certain of it, because she intended to think about it carefully, and thinking carefully required keeping the thing close. "I shall learn," she said. Her father's expression shifted. That particular movement she had always been able to read, and had never found easy to look at directly. The combination of pride and pain that meant he was proud of her and sorry for something at the same time. "You don't need to perform for them," he said. "I know," she closed the case, "but I'd like to get it right." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen, not because there was anything to write, but because her father had always needed something to do with his hands when he felt things strongly, and said, "You will." She believed him. She had always believed him. That, she thought, was both her greatest advantage and the thing she was most afraid of losing. Merrow Park was not what she had expected, which she acknowledged was her own failure of imagination. She had braced herself for grandeur, had spent the 3-day journey from Manchester, cataloguing the implications of the list, reading its 12 items as a map of the world she was entering. Grandeur she could have managed. Grandeur was only scale. Merrow Park was order. The drive approached through beech trees so evenly spaced they seemed planned from birth, which she supposed they had been. The house was stone and symmetry, each window precisely the same height as the last, the entrance portico framed with a deliberateness that made her feel, even before she descended from the carriage, that the building had formed opinions about her and was waiting to see whether they would be confirmed. The Duke was waiting on the steps. This surprised her. She had not expected to be met. He stood with his hands behind his back, his posture so correct it looked effortless, which meant it cost something. He was taller than she remembered. His expression was composed. "Miss Holt." "Your Grace." She had practiced that. It came out steadily. He descended 2 steps, enough to hand her down from the carriage, and she noticed that he moved without hesitation, without the small, anxious adjustments of a man uncertain how the moment would go. He had decided how it would go, and it was going that way. He led her inside. The housekeeper, Mrs. Quill, was introduced with quiet authority, a woman of 50 with the carriage of someone who had run a large household long enough to stop being impressed by anything. Cecily greeted her correctly, and then the senior footman, and then the upper housemaids. She used surnames throughout. She held each greeting at the correct temperature, not cold, not familiar. The particular warmth that meant I see you without meaning, come and tell me everything. It cost her something, that last part. She was aware of it. Edmund the Duke, she corrected herself, gave her a glance she couldn't quite read as they moved into the entrance hall. The tour was efficient. He showed her the public rooms in the manner of a man working through a prepared text, factual, complete, without inflection. The drawing room, the dining room, the library, which was very considerable, the morning room assigned to her use, which faced east and had good light, and a writing desk placed before the best window. "It's beautiful," she said, standing in the morning room, and meant it. "It is adequately furnished," he said. "If you find anything wanting, speak to Mrs. Quill." "I shall," she said. That evening they dined at a table built for 14. He sat at the head. She was placed at his right, 4 feet of empty mahogany between them. The candles were very fine. The soup was exceptional. They spoke of the journey, of the roads, of an oak that had come down across the North Lane in the last storm, and had not yet been cleared. He was not impolite. He was not precisely present. Afterward, in her room, Cecily took out the list. She read it again by candlelight, all 12 items. Then she found a piece of paper and wrote in the margin of her own notepaper, a rough accounting. Which items she understood completely, which required clarification, which she suspected she would find difficult. Item 7, familiar discourse with staff. She marked with a small asterisk and the note, define familiar. Item 4 she marked with a question. Does the restriction apply in all company or specifically formal company? Item 12 she left unmarked. She was still deciding what she thought about item 12. She folded the list back into quarters and put it in the dressing table drawer. She was here. She was going to get it right. The first failure came on the 5th day. She had gone to the kitchen, not to interfere, she told herself, only to ask about the bread, which had been extraordinary at dinner and at breakfast, and whose particular quality she found she could not stop thinking about. She had grown up in a house where the kitchen was the warmest room, where cook held court and expected visitors, and offered opinions on everything from wool prices to the mayor, and some habits, she was finding, were more deeply installed than others. The kitchen at Merrow Park was a different kind of room. Staffed by 7 people, under a cook of considerable talent and tremendous reserve, it went very still when Cecily appeared in the doorway. The specific stillness of people uncertain whether they were in trouble. "Please," she said, "carry on. I only wanted to ask about the bread." The cook, Mrs. Fenn, relaxed fractionally. "The bread, Your Grace?" "The rolls at dinner last night. There's something in them. Caraway, I think." Mrs. Fenn blinked. Then, testing the temperature of the exchange, "Caraway, Your Grace, my mother's recipe." "It's remarkable," Cecily said. She was in the kitchen for 40 minutes. She learned about the caraway rolls and the source of the Merrow Park cream and the difficulty of the East Kitchen garden in wet springs, and, because Mrs. Fenn, once warmed, was a woman who talked as she worked and saw no reason to stop, the name of her youngest daughter, who was apparently very promising on the pianoforte. She was nearly back to the main hall when she encountered Edmund. He had come from his study. He stopped when he saw her. His gaze moved briefly, precisely in the direction she had come from, and back. "Miss Holt." "To Your Grace." She kept her chin level. "I was speaking with Mrs. Fenn about the bread." A pause of 2 seconds. "I see," he said. He said nothing else. He continued toward his study. She continued toward the morning room. At her desk, she took out the list and reread item 7. Does not engage in familiar discourse with members of the household staff. She had not used Mrs. Fenn's Christian name. She had asked a professional question and then stayed to hear the answer at length, and had learned the name of a child who had nothing to do with the running of the estate. She read the item again. She wrote in the margin, very small, the kitchen visit was the failure, not the name. Then she thought about it further and added, noted for next time. She closed the list and put it away. Lord Fenwick arrived on a Tuesday in a curricle he had driven himself, at a pace that suggested the beach-lined drive was a personal challenge rather than an approach road. He was 30, sandy-haired, with an open face, and the particular ease of a man who had decided to like you before the introduction was over. You must be the new Duchess, he said, bowing in a manner that was correct but warm, the bow of a man who considered formality a courtesy rather than a contract. I have been in considerable suspense. Have you? Cecily said. Merrow told me very little, which means he was thinking about it a great deal. Edmund, arriving from behind him, said, Fenwick, in a tone that closed that subject efficiently. Fenwick closed it cheerfully and moved on to admiring the rose garden, asking Cecily her opinion of Derbyshire and comparing the Merrow Park Library favourably to several others he had recently visited. Within the hour, he had installed himself in said library with the territorial ease of a man who had been doing so since boyhood. He had. She discovered this that afternoon when she came to retrieve the book she'd left on the ottoman, and found Fenwick already occupying the chair she'd had in mind, feet at the fender, reading something she could not identify from the door. Sorry, he said without rising. I always do this, Merrow's past objecting. Don't apologize. She found her book. She stood at the door with it for a moment, some instinct for the correct thing, and then did not leave. She sat in the chair by the window instead. After a moment, Fenwick lowered his book. You're not what he expected, he said. What did he expect? Someone quieter. She looked at him steadily. I've been very quiet. I know, Fenwick said. That's what concerns me. The second appearance of the list came 10 days later, on a morning when the light was flat and autumnal, and Cecily had been at Merrow Park for a little over 3 weeks. She was in the morning room with the list on the writing desk, conducting a private audit. A line down the centre of her notepaper. Managed on one side, working on the other. Items 1 through 3, the dress, the manner at table, the correct form of address for various ranks, were firmly in the managed column. Item 5, which concerned involving herself in the management of the estate farms, had required genuine restraint on 2 occasions, but had held. Item 8, not contradicting the Duke on matters of household precedent, had held once narrowly after a conversation with Mrs. Quill about the winter linen inventory, in which Cecily had been fairly certain Mrs. Quill was wrong, and had nonetheless kept that information to herself. Item 7 was in the working on column, underlined. The door opened. She had the list face down, before she had fully registered moving. It was Edmund. He looked at her. He looked at the paper she had turned over. He looked away. I came to tell you my mother will arrive on Friday, he said. Cecily absorbed this. How long will she stay? A fortnight, perhaps. She will want to assess the situation. He paused. She is not unkind. I didn't assume she was. She has expectations of the position. Most people do. Something moved in his expression. She was learning to read him slowly, the way you learn a text in a language you partly know. It was not displeasure. It was closer to surprise, which she filed away. She will likely have observations, he said. Then I'll listen to them. Cecily kept her hands still. Is there anything specific you'd like me to be aware of before she arrives? He looked at her for a moment. She dislikes informality. Noted. And she will ask about your father's business. What would you like me to say? A pause, longer than the others. The truth, he said, which surprised her. She will find out regardless. Better she hears it plainly. Cecily nodded. Edmund turned to leave. Your Grace, she said. He stopped. Thank you for warning me. He was still for a moment. Just a moment, the briefest hesitation at the door, then he left. Cecily turned the list back over. She read it from item 1. Then she added a line to the managed column. Mother-in-law. Preparation underway. She was aware this was optimistic. She kept it anyway. Lady Merrow arrived on Friday at 2:30, in an enormously correct travelling carriage, wearing grey with an expression that had been refined over several decades into something capable of conveying displeasure without altering a single feature. She was not tall, but she stood as though she were, and when she looked at Cecily in the entrance hall, she did so with a directness that Cecily recognized, the look of a woman conducting an inventory and reserving her conclusions. "Miss Holt." "Lady Merrow." Cecily held her ground, hands at her sides, chin level. "I hope the journey was comfortable." "Adequate." The gaze moved briefly from Cecily's face to her dress and back. The dress was deep blue, not on the list, which addressed only informal colors. Cecily had chosen it with care and was not going to pretend otherwise. Tea in the drawing room. Fenwick, with the instinct of a man who had survived difficult rooms since Eton, discovered an urgent need to inspect the stables and did not reappear for 2 hours. Lady Merrow asked about Manchester. Cecily spoke of it plainly. She asked about Cecily's education. Cecily answered without apology. She asked, with the precision of a woman who had chosen her moment, about Mr. Holt's business. "He imports," Cecily said. "Cotton primarily, some wool. He began in cloth and expanded into shipping. He has been in trade for 30 years and is very good at it." She kept her voice the way her father kept his in a business meeting, even factual, without apology and without embellishment. "He is also the reason this estate will not require a mortgage for the next 20 years, but I expect you knew that." A silence. Edmund across the room had gone still. Lady Merrow set down her teacup. "You are direct," she said. "I've been told so. I hope you'll forgive it." "I haven't decided," Lady Merrow said, but something in her tone had shifted, half an inch the way a door moves when the latch gives. "More tea?" "Please," Cecily said. That evening, after his mother had retired and Fenwick had reappeared from the stables in excellent spirits, Edmund came to the library where Cecily was browsing spines. She did not hear him immediately. She was standing at the shelves, running her finger along the history section, thinking, using the books as something to do with her hands. He stood for a moment in the doorway. She was still in the blue dress. Her hair was done correctly. She had been meticulous about that since arriving, but a piece had come loose and lay against her neck. She was reading a spine with an expression of private interest, unguarded, the expression of someone alone. "Fenwick tells me the drainage issue on the North Field has resolved itself," he said. She turned. Her expression settled quickly, but he had caught the flicker before it did. "Has it?" she said. "Oddly so. Henders tells me the solution came to him quite suddenly, after a conversation with, as he described it, a well-informed lady visitor." Cecily was quiet for a moment. "The East Kitchen garden has the same soil gradient. I noticed the drainage there and thought the principle might apply." "Item 5, he said. Her chin came up fractionally, not defiance, acknowledgement. "I know. You spoke to my steward about the estate." "I spoke to your steward about drainage," she said, "which is also a domestic concern technically. Cellars flood. Kitchen gardens become impassable. I have managed a household since I was 17, Your Grace. It is difficult to unknow things." He looked at her. The library was quiet. Outside, rain had started. "Did you grow up here?" she asked. The question came without the usual preparatory approach. "Yes." "Do you like it?" A pause. "It is my home." "That isn't what I asked." The rain grew louder. He looked at the window, then back at her. "Yes," he said, "I like it." She nodded, as though this confirmed something, and turned back to the shelves. He should have left. He stayed another moment. He looked at what she was reading, history, natural philosophy, and one slim volume of verse tucked between them that he hadn't put there. "My mother," he said, "was more direct with you than she is with most people." "I know," Cecily said. "I considered it a good sign." He left the library. In the corridor he stopped for just a moment, looking back at the closed door. He had expected someone quieter. The London visit was arranged for a dinner at the home of Lord and Lady Cavendish, old friends of the Merrow family, senior enough that attendance was obligation rather than choice. Edmund conveyed the date with the brevity of a man imparting logistical facts and left Cecily to manage the rest. She managed it. She wrote to her father's London agent for guidance on current fashions. Her father maintained an agent in town for precisely this kind of practical intelligence. She wrote to a modiste whose name had been supplied by Fenwick's married sister, who had sent an unexpectedly kind note after the engagement announcement. She committed to memory the names and particulars of the anticipated guests. On the morning of departure, she appeared at the carriage in a dark green travelling dress that was, by any assessment, precisely correct. Edmund looked at her for a moment before handing her in. The carriage. They had not, she realized, been in a confined space together for any length of time. Merrow Park was large enough to make mutual distance easy. The library, the morning room, the east and west wings gave each of them sufficient territory. The carriage took that away. He was reading. She had brought a book, the natural philosophy from his library, taken with permission so briefly given she had wondered if he'd heard the question. She opened it. She read 3 pages and absorbed nothing. Derbyshire gave way to Nottinghamshire. "Do you know the Cavendishes?" she asked. "All my life." He did not look up. "Lady Cavendish is perceptive. She'll form an opinion of you quickly." "A favourable one, you hope?" "I expect." He turned a page. "She values character. You'll find that more common in my world than you've been led to believe." She looked at him. He was still reading. He was not saying this to be kind, she thought. He was saying it because it was accurate, which was the closest he came to reassurance. "Thank you," she said. He did not reply. After a moment he turned another page, and she thought she could not be certain that he had not been reading either. The Cavendish dinner was 16 people in a room that was warm and confident, the ease of a house that had nothing to prove. Lord Cavendish was jovial and shrewd. Lady Cavendish was 60, silver-haired, and possessed of a look that made a person feel they were sitting an examination they hadn't known was scheduled. She seated herself beside Cecily in the withdrawing room, after dinner, while the men remained at the table. "So," she said, "you're Merrow's Duchess." "Nearly," Cecily said. "The wedding is next month." "Near enough." A long, measuring look. "He's a difficult man to know." "I'm finding that, though I think he's consistent, which is something." "Ha!" Lady Cavendish seemed genuinely pleased by this. "Consistent. Yes, exactly. He has been consistent since he was 8 years old, and informed my husband that the fish pond on our east lawn was incorrectly stocked. He was right, of course." Cecily could see it. The boy who would become this man. "He gave me a list," she said, which she hadn't planned to say. Lady Cavendish turned. "A list. Have things a Duchess of Merrow does not do. 12 items. Cecily kept her voice mild. He sent it with his personal letter. He meant it sincerely. A pause. Then Lady Cavendish laughed, a genuine, unsuppressed laugh that turned 2 heads across the room. "Did he?" "I've been working through it," Cecily said. "And how are you faring?" 7 out of 12, consistently, working on the rest." Lady Cavendish looked at her for a long moment. "My dear," she said, "you are precisely what he needs. The only question is whether he is sensible enough to see it before he's driven you away." Cecily said nothing. She became aware, through some instinct she had not had in September and seemed to be developing now, that the men had come through. She heard Edmund's voice, even in register, across the room. She looked up. He was speaking with Lord Cavendish. He glanced over once briefly, and she had the strong impression that he had known exactly where she was and who she was speaking with. Lady Cavendish patted her hand and moved away to engage a viscount in what appeared to be vigorous disagreement. The return journey was late. They had stayed longer than expected. The roads were dark and the rain came and went in thin curtains against the glass. Cecily fell asleep. She had not meant to. She had been awake since 6, and a dinner requiring sustained correct behaviour had a particular kind of cost she was only beginning to measure. She woke when the carriage slowed, stiff-necked, momentarily uncertain. Edmund was opposite. He had, at some point she could not determine, placed his travelling coat over her shoulders. She looked at him. He was looking out the window with great attention at a road that was entirely dark and offered nothing of interest whatsoever. "We're nearly back," he said. She touched the coat. "Thank you." "How you were cold," he said to the window. She said nothing else. She looked at the dark beyond the glass and thought about the list in her travelling case and the word consistent and the sound of Lady Cavendish's laugh. The coat was warm. She left it where it was. Autumn at Merrow Park settled in quickly that year, the kind of season that made it clear why people had built houses in the country and stayed in them. The beeches went amber and copper along the drive, the morning mist sat in the low fields until 10, and the house, which had felt airless in late summer, seemed to ease into something more inhabitable, as though it too was relieved by the change. Cecily had been at Merrow Park for 6 weeks. She had in that time failed item 7 times by her own count, not the Christian name measure, which had never quite been the point, but the broader prohibition against familiar discourse, which she was now interpreting correctly as extended personal conversation that crosses the boundary between employer and employed. She had had 3 such conversations with Mrs. Fenn and 1 long exchange with the head groom about a lame mare that had somehow lasted 45 minutes and covered the mare's history, the groom's previous post, and his opinion of Derbyshire winters. She was not sorry about any of them. She was trying to be more discreet. She had succeeded at everything else. Item 4. Opinions on commercial matters. She had approached the border of twice and retreated each time. Item 5. The farms. She had managed by the simple expedient of redirecting her observations through questions rather than statements, which was technically compliant, and which she suspected Edmund knew about and had chosen not to address. The mornings were hers. Edmund worked from 7 until noon without exception. The household arranged itself around this, and Cecily used the time in the morning room, at her correspondence, and, 3 times a week, weather allowing, in the kitchen garden where she walked with a proprietary interest. She was careful not to advertise. On a Wednesday in early October, she was in the kitchen garden when she heard footsteps on the gravel path and looked up to find Edmund there, coatless, which meant he had come directly from his study without intending to go out at all. "I didn't hear you come out," she said. "I wasn't going out." He looked at the garden around her, the beds, the path arrangement, the new drainage channel along the east wall. "I came to find you." "Is something wrong?" "No." He stopped at the usual distance. "My mother writes that she is going back to London. She asked me to convey her regards." Lady Merrow had left the week before at the close of her fortnight, and the parting had been, if not warm, then less cool than the arrival. On the last morning in the entrance hall, Lady Merrow had looked at Cecily for a long moment and said, "You are managing better than I expected." Cecily had received this as the significant compliment it was intended to be. "That's kind of her," she said. "She also said," Edmund continued with the evenness of a man choosing carefully, "that you handled the Cavendish dinner well. Lady Cavendish was very kind." "Lady Cavendish is never kind. She is honest. It is a different thing." Cecily looked at him. He was looking at the garden, at the path arrangement, the retrenched beds, the drainage channel along the east wall. "I moved the lavender," she said. "Technically." "I noticed." "Is that item 5? "Item 5, he said, "concerns the estate farms." He looked at the channel. "Not kitchen gardens." She let that settle. Not an apology. He did not apologize for things he had written in full sincerity, but an adjustment. She had begun to understand the difference. "Your mother told me," she said carefully, "that you informed Lord Cavendish his fish pond was incorrectly stocked when you were 8. A pause. "I was correct." "I know," she said. "I thought it was interesting." "In what way?" "I have always known things precisely and said them. It isn't something that developed, it is simply what you are." Edmund looked at her. The October light was low and direct, the kind that shows everything without softening it. "My mother found that quality inconvenient when I was young," he said. "I imagine she did." "She found a great many things about me inconvenient." He said it without self-pity, flatly, with the matter-of-factness of a man who has long since filed the information away and no longer expects it to hurt. The standard of behavior, the way one presents oneself, the expectations of the position, that was very important in this house. Cecily was quiet. "I don't say this as an explanation," he said. "I understand." "I am aware," he said, "that the list I gave you was perhaps not the most—" He stopped. He looked at the lavender. "It was sincerely meant." "I know," she said. "I've been using it in that spirit." He looked at her again, and she had the impression of a man standing at the edge of something he had not planned to approach. "Henders tells me the north field is draining correctly," he said. "It saves a significant replanting cost." "Good. The kitchen garden paths are more efficient." "I thought so." A pause, different from the others, longer, with something in it that wasn't quite consideration. "Item 5, he said, "does not cover kitchen gardens." He looked at the drainage channel, or drainage easements on domestic land. She understood that this was as close as he would come this morning to whatever was on the other side of what he was saying. She did not push. Patience with Edmund Wycliffe was not a concession. It was simply the right tool. "Will you walk?" she said. "It's a good morning for it." He considered this with the seriousness he brought to most things. Then, yes, all right. They walked the full perimeter of the kitchen garden, then the orchard, then, because neither of them said to stop, the lower east field, where the drainage channel ran alongside the path doing its quiet, unremarkable work. He talked about the estate, the winter preparations, the lime washing of the east cottages, a disputed boundary on the Halloway side that would require legal correspondence. He talked about these things with the precision of a man who genuinely cared about them, and she listened with the attention of someone to whom the subject was new and entirely interesting, and she asked questions, and he answered them without any of the subtle reduction of register that people often applied when explaining things to women they had underestimated. After an hour, they turned back toward the house. At the kitchen garden gate, he stopped. "You have not failed item 9, he said. Item 9. A Duchess of Merrow does not offer unsolicited commentary on the Duke's estate management decisions. She had approached its borders many times. She had not failed it. I've been careful, she said. I know. And then, brief enough that she might have missed it, it has been noted. He went back to his study. Cecily stood at the gate for a moment, looking at the field, the clear channel, the particular low light of early October. She went inside, sat at her desk, and took out the list. She read it from item 1 to item 12. Then she turned it over and wrote on the back in small, careful letters, "He is not what I expected either." She looked at it for a moment. She did not cross it out. The failure of item 4 came at dinner. It was the three of them, Cecily, Edmund, Fenwick, and Fenwick had brought in a letter from his man of business in London, which he had been reading before dinner and which he could not, apparently, entirely set aside. He mentioned, with the innocent air of a man who had learned to be ingeniously casual about such things, that the proposed revision to the Turnpike and Drainage Bill, currently before Parliament, had created considerable uncertainty about land improvement financing across the northern counties. Cecily had managed 2 sentences of careful agreement. Then Fenwick, with the thoroughness of a man who didn't know when to stop, added that the particular clause causing difficulty was the one governing cost apportionment between landowners and the county trust. And she knew, with the complete certainty of a woman who had sat through her father's dinner table for 22 years, exactly how that clause was being misread, and why, and she said so. She said it clearly and accurately, and was 3 sentences into the explanation before she fully registered what she was doing. She stopped. The table was quiet. Edmund was looking at her, not with displeasure, that was the thing she could not read, with a focused attention, different in kind from his usual precision. "That is," he said slowly, "an interesting point." Fenwick had the expression of a man who had just won something he had been angling for. "I apologize," Cecily said. Item 4. Item 4, Edmund said, specifies in company. He looked around the table. 3 people, none of them in any relevant social circle, Fenwick, who would carry nothing anywhere. "I am not certain this constitutes company in the intended sense." Fenwick said with tremendous cheerfulness, "I find I have absolutely no opinion on that question," and refilled his wine. Cecily looked at Edmund. He had returned to his dinner with the manner of a man who had said what he meant to say, and considered the matter closed. Later, after Fenwick had gone to bed and the house had gone quiet, she sat in the morning room and took out the list and looked at item 4 for a long time. She wrote in the margin, "Contested, once by him." She held the folded list in both hands. Outside, the Derbyshire dark was complete. No moon, only the wind off the high ground and the quiet of Old Stone. The house settled around her, its particular creak and shift, the sound of a place that was, slowly, without announcement, beginning to hold her. She put the list away and went to bed. October became November, and with it came the Hartley family from the neighbouring estate, and with them their eldest daughter, Miss Hartley, who was 22, accomplished in all the expected ways, and had, according to Fenwick's indiscreet but not unkind account, been assumed by at least one county family to be the eventual Duchess of Merrow. Cecily heard this while at the pianoforte in the music room, where she had retreated before dinner on the basis that item 11's restriction on informal playing applied to the drawing room in the presence of guests, and Fenwick had wandered through from the library and installed himself in the armchair by the window with a book he was not reading. She stumbled on a bar, corrected herself, continued. "I see," she said. "Ancient history," Fenwick said. "It was never serious on his side, whatever it may have been on hers. She is accomplished, I'm told." "She is." A pause. "You're not concerned." It was not quite a question. Cecily finished the piece, hands in her lap. "I am the Duchess of Merrow," she said, "or will be in 3 weeks. I am learning the position as carefully as I'm capable of." She paused. "Concern doesn't seem productive." "No," Fenwick said, "though it's often unavoidable." She looked at him. He was looking at his book. "Is he happy?" she asked. The question arrived before she'd decided on it. Fenwick was quiet for a moment. "He is more present than he was," he said, choosing his words with unusual care. "Before you arrived, he was here in every practical sense, but there are times now when he is—" He stopped. "Here," she said. "Yes, here." She played another bar. The November sky pressed low and grey beyond the music room window, and the beeches at the end of the drive had given up the last of their colour, and the house was very quiet. "Item 11, she said, restricts informal playing before dinner in the drawing room." She played a chord that was entirely informal. "I'm in the music room. I'm working on the distinction." Fenwick, for the first time in her experience, laughed until he had to set down his book. The evening she found Edmund in the portrait gallery, not seeking him out, simply passing through on her way from the East Wing. He was standing before his father's portrait, and she knew, with the particular knowledge of a person who has learned to read a man's stillness, that she should either leave entirely or stay completely. She stayed. She stood beside him. The fourth Duke of Merrow looked very like his son. The same height, the same contained posture, the same quality of attention the painter had caught in the eyes. "He was exacting," Edmund said. "Not to her particularly." "Yes," she said. "Everything in this house was built to a standard. The way you greeted people, the way you sat at table, the way you spoke." He paused. "I thought for a long time that was simply what a house was." "What changed?" "School," he said. "Then university. I saw other kinds of houses." Another pause. "I did not know what to do with that information." "So you kept the standard?" "It was the only grammar I had." She looked at the portrait. She thought about the list, 12 items in that unhurried exact hand. She thought about a boy who learned to be correct, because correct was the only thing that was never questioned. "Your Grace," she said. "Edmund," he said. She turned. He was looking at her, not the portrait. "You've been here nearly 2 months. We are to be married in a fortnight. I think Edmund will do." She held the word for a moment. The gallery was still. "Edmund," she said. His name in her mouth was different from "Your Grace," more specific, more real, less a title and more a person. He nodded once and looked back at the portrait. "He would have found you very inconvenient," he said. "I know," she said. "I find—" He stopped, looked at the portrait for another moment. "I find it considerably less inconvenient than I anticipated." Coming from Edmund Wycliffe in a portrait gallery in November, she understood this for exactly what it was. "Thank you," she said. They stood in the gallery a few minutes more, in the particular quiet of a house that was beginning, slowly, carefully, without either of them announcing it, to feel like it held them both. The wedding was on a Friday in the first week of November, in the church at the edge of the Merrow Park estate, small, stone, 200 years of Wycliffe baptisms and burials in the walls. There were 14 guests. Fenwick stood up with Edmund. Cecily's father had come from Manchester, and sat in the front pew and looked at his daughter throughout the ceremony, with an expression she deliberately did not look at, because she had lines to say, and intended to say them clearly. It was quiet and correct, and over in 40 minutes. Afterward, at the small dinner Edmund had arranged, 14 at the table, the good silver, no ceremony beyond what was required, her father shook Edmund's hand and said, "She is the best thing I have ever done," and Edmund said, "I am beginning to understand that," and her father looked across the table at Cecily with the expression she had been managing to avoid, and she looked back at him steadily, and that was the whole of it. The guests departed by 9. Fenwick, with a tact that she suspected had cost him considerable effort, invented an engagement in Bakewell and left before the last carriage cleared the drive. At 9:30, Cecily sat at the dressing table in the Duchess's rooms. She had moved into them the week before, at Mrs. Quill's gentle suggestion, and her maid unpinned her hair and withdrew, and the house was quiet. She and Edmund had spoken briefly after dinner, practically about the following week. A tenant matter, a letter from his steward requiring attention, the revised arrangement for the East Wing guest rooms. He had been more careful than usual, more deliberate in the way he inhabited the space between them, and she had not been certain what to do with that except to be steady herself, which was what she generally did when she was uncertain. She opened the dressing-table drawer and took out the list. It was more worn now than it had been in September, the fold lines soft, the edges frayed from being taken out and put back too many times to count. She spread it flat on the table and read it through. All 12 items. Then she turned it over and read the 2 lines she had written on the back. "He is not what I expected either. October." And below it, added after the portrait gallery in November, "He is learning a different grammar. So am I." She sat with it in the candlelight, the Derbyshire dark pressed against the window. The connecting door between their rooms, its existence had been communicated to her by Mrs. Quill on the day she moved in the quiet, informative way that good housekeepers convey arrangements that are understood rather than negotiated, opened. Edmund stood in the doorway. He had removed his coat. He looked at her, then at the paper in her hands. She did not turn it over. He came into the room. He did not stop at the threshold or take a chair or create any of the managed distances she had spent 2 months learning to read. He came to where she sat and looked at the list spread on the table. She watched him read it, both sides, the items, the margin notes, the 2 lines on the back. When he looked up, his face had something in it she had not seen before. Not the composed precision, not the careful neutrality, something underneath those things, something that had been there, she thought, for some time without a name. "You've been working from it," he said. "Yes, since September. Since the letter came to Manchester," she said, "before I arrived." He looked at the margin beside item 4, contested once by him. He read it aloud. "I have said it didn't constitute company in the relevant sense," she said. "I thought that was worth noting." He set the list down. He looked at it on the table between them. "I wrote it," he said, "because I did not know what else to do with you." She waited. "I chose you," he said, "because I thought—" He stopped. He looked at the candle, then back at her. "I thought you would be easier to manage than someone from my own world, someone without expectations of it, someone who would be grateful enough to—" He stopped again. It was not a generous calculation. "I know what the calculation was," she said. "I understood it in September. And you came anyway." "I wanted something real," she said. "I thought even with the calculation, there might be room for that. I thought if I could learn the shape of it, I could—" She paused. "I thought the list was the shape of it." "It wasn't," he said. "No," she said, "it was the shape of your fear." The candle moved in a small draught. His face was very still. "I have been afraid of the wrong things," he said, "for a long time." She looked at him. He was standing closer than he had ever stood without the management of a room's worth of distance between them. In the low light, he looked less like the Duke of Merrow and more like a man who had run out of prepared positions and was standing in the open for the first time. "The list," he said, "was not for you." "I know that now," she said. "It was a way of making something I couldn't control feel controllable." He said it flatly, the matter-of-factness she had learned to read as a particular kind of courage. "You were a variable I hadn't accounted for, so I tried to reduce you to something I could manage." 12 items, she said. 12 items, he looked at her, "and you used it as a guide." "I wanted to get it right," she said. "That hasn't changed." Cecily, her name in his mouth. He had used it only a handful of times, always carefully, as though it required handling. "You have been getting it right. That is precisely—" He stopped. "I have been watching you get it right, and finding I no longer want what I asked for." She held that. "What do you want?" she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the wind was off the high ground, the particular November sound of Merrow Park that she had already, in 2 months, begun to know as something like home. "This," he said, "whatever this is. The kitchen garden and the drainage and the way you speak to Mrs. Fenn and the notes in the margins and the fact that you walked into the portrait gallery and stood there and did not say anything foolish." He paused. "The way you said my name, in the gallery." "Edmund," she said. "Yes," he said, "and that—" She stood. He did not step back. They were very close. She could see it plainly now. The thing she had been reading in him for 2 months, the careful, constructed distance, and underneath it, something that had been there since Manchester, since the Haverfield Assembly, since he had looked at her as though she was worth looking at, and then tried methodically to manage what that meant. "I am going to fail several more items on that list," she said, "probably for the rest of my life." "I know," he said. "Item 7 especially. Mrs. Fenn's daughter is apparently exceptional on the pianoforte," he said. "I have been informed." "She is," Cecily said. "I heard her last week." The corner of his mouth moved, barely. Not quite a smile, not yet, but the clear direction of one. She reached up and touched his face, her hand against his jaw. "The way you touch something you have been careful around for a long time and have finally decided to stop being careful about." He turned his face slightly into her hand. He closed his eyes for just a moment. Then he opened them and looked at her. Not the Duke of Merrow, not the man with the list and the correct posture and the 12 items, but Edmund, who had grown up in a house that taught him to be correct, and had spent 32 years building walls he was no longer certain he wanted. She took her hand away. He caught it. He held her hand in both of his, not pulling her toward him, simply holding it with a careful attention she recognized as his particular way of feeling things. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "The real version." "Neither do I," she said. "Not here, not exactly this. We could—" A pause, and she saw the dry edge of him, the quality she had been glimpsing for months. Approach it methodically. A list, she said. God, no, he said. She laughed. The first time she had laughed with him, not politely, not carefully, but actually, and the sound of it in the quiet room seemed to surprise them both. He was still holding her hand. We could simply try, she said, and see what happens. Yes, he said, I think that's right. 3 weeks after the wedding, the first snow of the season came to Derbyshire. A light dusting that was gone by noon, but which announced its intentions clearly. The estate contracted into itself the way it did in cold weather. Fires banked earlier, shutters drawn against the east wind, the smoke from the tenant cottages visible all the way from the upper field in the sharp morning air. Cecily had been Duchess of Merrow for 3 weeks. She was still failing item 7. She had, at this point, accepted this about herself and was operating on the private principle of ensuring the Duke was not present when the failures occurred, which was an imperfect arrangement and one she suspected he was aware of. Mrs. Fenn had begun saving her the end of whatever was most interesting from the day's baking. The head groom had started leaving the stable records in a location that might, if one were inclined, be described as accessible. These things had happened without arrangement, which she had always considered the best kind of happening. Item 12, the bright yellows, the colours considered too informal, she had not failed. She was, however, wearing an amber morning dress that she maintained was an entirely different register. Edmund had looked at it twice and said nothing, and she had taken the silence as permission. The rest she was holding. What had changed since the night of the wedding was not the items on the list. It was the grammar of the house. It was the grammar between them. He came to find her now. Not always with purpose, sometimes with an estate question, sometimes with a book he thought she might want, once with a piece of correspondence that he said required a second opinion, and then, when she gave it, listened to completely, and revised his reply in the direction she had suggested, without acknowledgement and without ceremony, which she recognized as the highest form of agreement he was capable of. She had stopped being surprised when he appeared in the morning room, or the kitchen garden, or the library. She had begun to expect it, which was its own kind of change. She came to find him too. Less often she was still learning the perimeter, but sometimes in the evenings she appeared at the study door, and he looked up, and something in his expression shifted in the particular way she had learned to read as welcome. Dinner every evening now. Not a procedural dinner, a real one. They talked about the estate and her father's latest letter and the book she was reading and the one he was. He had opinions about natural philosophy that she found interesting and occasionally wrong and said so, and he argued back with complete seriousness, and these arguments had become the things she most looked forward to each day. Fenwick arrived for a pre-Christmas visit and took one look at the two of them at breakfast and helped himself to 3 pieces of toast with the manner of a man whose satisfaction was total. Don't, Edmund said. I haven't said a word. You were about to. I was going to ask for the marmalade. Edmund passed it. Fenwick caught Cecily's eye and she held her expression perfectly neutral, and he ate his toast with tremendous private contentment. Lady Merrow came for the week before Christmas. She was, if not warmer than before, then differently cool, the temperature of a woman who has revised her assessment and is not yet ready to say so, but has stopped conducting the original inquiry. She spoke to Cecily about the household arrangements with something approaching collegiality. She noted once that the kitchen garden looked improved. She did not remark on the amber dress. On her 3rd evening, she and Cecily were in the drawing-room without the men. Edmund at the far field with his steward, Fenwick reliably in the library, and Lady Merrow set down her embroidery and said, with the evenness of a woman delivering a considered verdict, "You are managing the house well." "Thank you," Cecily said. Edmund appears, a pause, less contained than he was. "He is allowing himself to want things," Cecily said carefully. Lady Merrow looked at her, a long, particular look. "He was not permitted to want things," she said. "When he was young, his father felt it was self-indulgent." She looked at her embroidery. "I allowed the standard. I allowed it because I did not know another way to run this house, and I did not question it as I should have done." She said it without softness, flat, factual, the tone of a woman accounting for something that cannot be changed. "You should know that." Cecily looked at this woman. The composed face, the correct posture, the hands briefly stilled in her lap. She thought about the list. About a boy who had been taught to be correct, because correct was the only thing that was never questioned. "He is very like you," Cecily said. Lady Merrow looked up, sharp. "In the best ways," Cecily said. "The precision, the consistency, the fact that when he says something he means it completely." She paused. "Those are your qualities too. I've watched you." A silence. "You are very direct," Lady Merrow said. "I know," Cecily said. "I'm working on it." Lady Merrow looked at her for another moment, then briefly controlled the smile of a woman who had not forgotten how, only fallen out of the habit. She smiled. "Don't," she said. It was Fenwick who, on his last evening before returning south for Christmas, sat beside Cecily after dinner and said with the quietness of a man laying something down, "He has never been like this." She looked at him. "I have known him since we were 11, Fenwick said. "He has always been present in the practical sense, reliable, correct. But there is a version of Edmund I always suspected existed and could never quite reach." He considered his glass. "I think you've reached it." Cecily said nothing. She thought about the portrait gallery, the hand held in the candlelight. This, whatever this is. "He chose me," she said, "because he thought I would be manageable." "I know he said so." A pause. "He was already wrong about it by the time he said it. I could see that from across the room." "At the Haverfield Assembly," she said. "Yes." Fenwick turned his glass in his hand. "He spoke to you for 20 minutes. I watched from near the door. He came to find me afterward with the expression of a man who has put something down somewhere and cannot determine exactly when it went missing." He paused. He had the list written within the fortnight, which, if you know Edmund, is practically a declaration. She absorbed this. "Item 12, she said, "the colours." "Ah." Fenwick's expression shifted, the very slight adjustment of a man deciding how much to say. "I was standing beside him when you came into the Haverfield Assembly. You were wearing yellow, a particular yellow, with white ribbon at the sleeve. You were talking to someone and you laughed at something they said, not politely." He set down his glass. He didn't move for rather a long time. She stared at him. "He didn't tell me this," Fenwick said, correctly reading her expression. "He didn't have to. I was there. I saw his face." A pause. "The list item about informal colours. I only understood it afterward. It was the only way he knew how to account for the fact that yellow gave him trouble. He wrote a propriety rule," she said slowly, "to manage something he didn't want to have noticed." "Yes," Fenwick said. "That is Edmund, exactly." "Good night, Your Grace," Fenwick said with the dignity of a man who has delivered his information and knows when to leave, and went to bed. Christmas Eve. The house was warm in the particular way it only managed in winter. Fires in every room, the smell of the kitchen moving through the upper halls, the sound of the staff's own celebration rising occasionally from below stairs, which Cecily had quietly encouraged, and Edmund had this year not prevented. They were in the library. It had become, without agreement or announcement, their room, the place they ended each day, the place where the managed distance between them had first begun, incrementally, to close. The fire was high. Outside, snow was settling on the park, making everything white and still. Edmund was reading. She was not. She was watching the snow, feet tucked beneath her in the chair which was not on any list, and had long since ceased to require justification. She had the list in her pocket. She had taken to carrying it there in the past month, not to consult it, simply as a habit, the way you keep something familiar close until you're certain you no longer need it. "Edmund," she said. He looked up. "Fenwick told me about the yellow." He held her gaze for a moment, then he looked back at his book. "Fenwick," he said, "has a very poor understanding of what constitutes private observation. Is it true?" A pause. He turned a page he had not read. "You wore a yellow dress," he said, "with white ribbon at the sleeve, at the Haverfield Assembly. You were speaking with someone, I don't recall who, and you laughed at something they said. Not a social laugh." He paused. "I had been intending to approach you for 10 minutes before I managed it." She looked at him. "And then," she said, "you spoke with me for 20 minutes and sent me a list banning yellow. The item," he said, "addresses colours considered too informal for formal occasions." The dry edge in his voice was unmistakable. Yellow was cited as an example. "One example," she said, "the only example." It seemed the most pressing one at the time. She laughed, and he looked up at the sound of it with the expression she could not have named in September, and knew completely now. She reached into her pocket and took out the list. She held it across the space between their chairs. "I want you to have it back," she said. "I don't need it anymore." He looked at it, at the worn fold lines, the soft edges, 2 months of margin notes. He took it. He read it slowly, both sides. The items, the corrections, the contested notations, the 2 lines on the back in October and November. He held it for a long moment, resting in both hands. Then he leaned forward and placed it on the fire. They watched it go. A brief brightness and then nothing, the paper folding into itself and becoming something else entirely. Item 12, she said. Was a mistake from the beginning, he said. I knew it when I wrote it. She looked at him. He was watching the last of it burn, his profile steady in the firelight, and she saw him whole, the boy in the portrait gallery, the man who had built his house around rules he no longer wanted, the person who had stood at the Haverfield Assembly and not known what to do with what he saw and had, in the only grammar he had, written a list. She stood and crossed to the sofa where he sat, not far, only the width of the hearthrug, and settled beside him, and he moved to make room with the ease of a man who had been waiting for that particular distance to close and had not known how to close it himself. She took his hand. He looked at it, then at her, then with the expression that was not the Duke of Merrow, not the list, not any of the 12 items, simply Edmund, in his own library, on Christmas Eve, in the house that was becoming, properly and finally, a place where something real could live. You could write a new one, she said, if you wanted a different kind. What would it say? She thought about it. The snow outside, the fire, the room that had become theirs. A Duchess of Merrow, she said, may speak to Mrs. Fenn about the bread, may reroute the drainage, may hold opinions on parliamentary bills in company of 3 or fewer, may wear any colour she chooses. She paused, may laugh when she means it. He was quiet for a moment. May call her husband by his name, he said. That one especially, she said. He looked at her, and the corner of his mouth moved, and then he stopped trying to prevent it, and it became, at last, an actual smile, unhurried, unguarded, the smile of a man who had finally decided that wanting something did not require a case built in its defence. Outside, Merrow Park was white and still. The beeches stood dark against the snow. The tenant cottage smoke rose clean into the cold air. Inside, the fire was warm, and the library held them both, and the list was ash, and there was nothing left between them but the real thing, which was, they were both discovering, considerably better than anything 12 items could have built. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He did not move away. After a moment, his hand, still holding hers, shifted, fingers interlacing with the quiet deliberateness of a man who has stopped being careful about what he wants. Cecily, he said. Edmund, she said. The snow fell on. The fire burned low. The house was very quiet in the particular way of a place that has found its proper use at last.
Don't forget to like and subscribe, or at least leave a comment if you enjoyed the story.